back to Food Prep Guide. We are back today with another Preserving the Harvest video. Today's all about blueberries. Now this isn't going to be a harvest from my backyard because we just planted our blueberry bushes this year. So it's going to be a couple of years before we get to enjoy a pretty large harvest from those. So we got these from our local Amish market and got a good deal on them. And we also went to a U-pick farm, which was a lot of fun. It's our first time doing a U-pick farm. And it was just a blast. I highly recommend taking the family out to a U-pick farm if you've never experienced that. But today we're going to be doing mostly canning. And a lot of these Preserving the Harvest videos, we try to preserve it multiple different ways, just because that just gives me more versatility in my kitchen. But today we are only going to be canning. I was thinking about freezing some, but then we had a extended power outage this week again, and it just reminded me that the freezer is absolutely not reliable in my circumstances, so I decided to go ahead and can everything. But we are going to be canning it in different ways using different recipes, and we'll bring you along for each of those. Let's get started. Welcome to Food Prep Guide. My name is Jordan. I'm a homeschooling mom to 3, living on 3 beautiful acres with my wonderful husband. A health crisis forced our family to change the way we think about food. Unfortunately, it also put us in financial hardship. Thankfully, the solution to both challenges was the same: to live off the land as much as possible. For us, that means growing a garden, preserving the harvest, raising chickens, and cooking from scratch. It's definitely a family affair. And friends, too. Meet Stacy, researcher, author, and lifelong learner. She entered the world of food preservation in the crazy days of 2020. She joined a gleaning co-op, and a local grocer offered her clearance produce in bulk. And so the adventure began. Together, we're reclaiming the old ways of food stewardship and teaching them to the next generation. If there's one thing you should know about us, it's that we love Jesus and seek to steward his blessings wisely. Our table always has room for one more, so y'all come join us. The first recipe we're going to make is a blueberry pie filling, and we need to start with making the filling part, the goopy part. And we need to start with 4 3/4 cups of water, 2 1/4 cups of sugar, half a cup of arrowroot powder. This is normally going to be clear gel. I do deviate from the tested recipe, and I will discuss that in more detail in just a minute. Next, we need half a teaspoon of salt, half a tablespoon of lemon juice, and then I like to go ahead and throw in a little bit of vanilla extract. As you can see, I don't measure, but just a little pour. If I had to guess, maybe 2 teaspoons or so. And then I usually go ahead and add in some sort of spice. Sometimes I do cinnamon, sometimes I do pumpkin pie spice, but for this go round, I decided to just not spice it in any kind of way and just let it stay with that strong vanilla type flavor. Once we got all of our ingredients in, we just give that a good mix and then bring that up to a boil. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my heat up to medium high and let that get boiling. Once we get to this stage, we need to be constantly stirring it because it does stick to the bottom of the pot really easily. But what we're looking for when it comes to doneness is for all these little bubbles for that surface. Like, this is exactly what it should be looking like when it's about ready. And when you stick your spatula in and turn it, it should very slowly drip off, not like it's water, but more like a thick, slightly thick syrup. So once that happens, you can take it off the heat and go ahead and start filling your jars. We are going to be filling our jars with blueberries to 1-inch headspace. Now, normally with fruits, we go ahead and do a 1/4-inch headspace for jams and a half-inch headspace for other fruits. But for pie fillings, they are notorious for siphoning. They are notorious for boiling over out of the jars. So for that reason, we need to leave a good 1-inch headspace on pie fillings. You can see that as I'm going through the blueberries, I'm picking out any that are underripe. I'm also picking out any stems that I may have missed during the washing process. Now, I don't show the washing process, on camera because, it's just washing fruit. But for everything that I can, I will soak it in a produce wash using food-grade hydrogen peroxide mixed with water. And that's what as a general rule of thumb, that's what I wash all of my produce with. but especially when I'm going to be canning. Because that food grade hydrogen peroxide is a very powerful disinfectant without being a harsh chemical, if that makes sense. So I mentioned that I do deviate from the tested, proven, safe recipe for pie filling. So I am preserving my harvest the way that my family enjoys it. So don't take this video as here is the exact right way to can pie filling. Now, if you're a friend of Food Prep Guide, you know that I am a stickler when it comes to canning safety. So any of the variations that I make are not a safety issue. They are simply a process issue, and I have studied thoroughly and researched thoroughly to ensure that this recipe is still safe. With most pie fillings, you're going to be using clear gel. I don't like using clear gel because it is modified cornstarch. We have tried to eliminate modified cornstarch or modified pretty much anything out of our diet, and so for that reason, I choose to use arrowroot powder instead. I got this recipe and this process for fruit pie fillings from Three Rivers Homestead, Jessica. This is the way she does it because her family has some pretty severe allergies. Now, we don't have severe allergies, but we have that same just goal of eliminate modified stuff from our diet, especially when it's corn, because it's such a heavily sprayed crop and GMO crop, and corn starch is a byproduct of that. So that's why I have switched to arrowroot powder, and I have done the research so that I am comfortable with making that switch without being concerned. Another deviation is that the tested safe recipe cooks the blueberries first, cooks them down, and I don't. As you can see, I'm doing a raw pack here. Again, do your research, do what you're comfortable with. These are deviations, and I just want to let you know that if you are an absolute brand new canner, I highly recommend only sticking to tested, proven safe recipes with no deviations until you get some experience under your belt. Okay, so once all those jars are loaded, it's time to just fill it up with goop. So when we're filling up the pie filling, again, we want to give it a 1-inch headspace, and I normally have to go back through 2 or 3 times because that goop takes, it kind of filtrates those blueberries very slowly. And so what I do is I just go through, and I usually do 2 scoops per jar and then move on to the next one, even if it's not quite full yet. Because by the time I make it through all the jars and get back to the first one, that goop and filling has had time to settle. I need to come up with a better word than goop. Filling. That filling has had time to settle, and I can continue going through and topping off the jars to 1-inch headspace. So that's what I do here. Use the funnel because this stuff is really sticky, and we don't want to risk not getting a good seal. But we'll wash our rims good here in just a minute. And next, we just need to do the typical tasks for getting ready for canning, and that is to debubble first. This is an extremely important step for this particular recipe because pie filling tend to have a lot of air pockets in that filling. So we want to debubble very good all the way around, give it a good mix before we add our lids and rings. Next, we need to wipe our rims really well. Like I said, this stuff is really sticky, and it's almost impossible to not get some on your rims while you're putting it into your jars, despite the canning funnel, because the canning funnel itself has it on there. But because of that reason, I usually go ahead and have 2 separate cloths. You can see I just switched to a new one because it's just such a mess. And so having that second cloth on hand helps me to get our rims nice and clean. After that, we need to add the lids and rings. We add our rings to fingertip tight, which for me, I just go to the point of resistance and then just a slight quarter turn more. Picture the hands on a clock, like you're going from 12 to 3, just a quick quarter turn. And then we are ready to load up our canner. You can see I already had my canner halfway full with water, and I've had it sitting on warm this whole time. And then we just load them in and go ahead and submerge under the water. After we submerge under the water, we need to make sure that the water is a good solid inch above the jar line, and in this case I had about 2 inches, so we were good to go. We're going to go ahead and put the lid on and bring this canner up to temperature, which means I'm going to turn it all the way high. Once we're at a very hard rolling boil, we're ready to start our processing time, and this recipe needs to process for 30 minutes. Be sure to check your elevation and add whatever processing time is necessary. So as you can see, I mentioned that pie filling is notorious for siphoning and for boiling over, and you can see that that happened here on 2 jars. The one that I just pointed to ended up sealing fine. This last one, or in the back here, it boiled over so bad. I didn't even give it a chance to seal because, I mean, look at that. It's just, even if it did seal, I wouldn't feel confident in it because of how much goop there is between the seal and the jar. So I went ahead and just put that one straight into the fridge. And at the end of this video, I'm going to go ahead and show you one of our absolute favorite recipes that we use this for, so that you can just get an idea of different ways you can use pie fillings, even if you don't eat pie like we do. We're not a huge pie eating family, but we love cobblers and crisps and cinnamon rolls and fruit rolls and that kind of thing. So I will show you a sneak peek of that recipe towards the end of this video, so stay tuned. Okay, next project is blueberry jam. I have tried several different blueberry jam recipes over the years, and this is the one I always come back to because it has a pumpkin pie spice in it, and it just complements the flavors of the blueberry really well. So first we need to go ahead and crush up our blueberries. I started with 2.5 quarts, and in case I didn't mention it, I used 2.5 quarts of blueberries for the pie filling too. So we bought a total of 5 quarts at the U-Pick farm. And I used 2.5 quarts for the blueberry pie filling and 2.5 quarts for this blueberry jam. You can crush up your berries however you want. You can use a potato masher. I go ahead and run it through my food blender, but I don't puree it to a thin puree. I like it to be lots of chunks in my jam. So I leave it pretty chunky. And once you get everything crushed and pureed the way that you want it, go ahead and put it in a pot, because we are ready to go ahead and add our ingredients. This jam recipe goes very quickly. So the first ingredient besides the fruit is 10 tablespoons of pectin. I use Hoosier Hill Farm, and they have a ratio on the back so that if you're not using exactly 2.5 quarts of blueberries, you can still make this recipe and just tweak it according to those package instructions. To that, we're going to add 1 tablespoon of lemon juice, and then 1 teaspoon of pumpkin pie spice. And if you don't want to use pumpkin pie spice, you can just use the mixture of cinnamon, cloves, and allspice separately. That's basically what pumpkin pie spice is. And as always, anytime I make anything blueberry, I add a splash of vanilla. Give everything a good stir, and then we will have to bring this to a hard rolling boil before we add our next ingredients. Just as a side note, this isn't technically part of the recipe, but if I'm stirring it and I notice there's not a whole lot of liquid, I do go ahead and add a splash of water just so that jam doesn't scorch when we're bringing it up to heat. I probably added maybe half a cup. I don't typically measure. I just kind of eyeball it. I just want enough liquid in there to where when I'm bringing it up to a high boil, it's not going to scorch the bottom of the pan. Once we're boiling, it's time to add the sugar. And we need to add 10 cups of sugar. I know that is a ridiculous amount of sugar, but that's what's needed to make the pectin set. There is a type of pectin called Pomona's pectin that uses less sugar. I haven't tried that. I just learned about it last year, and I just haven't gotten my hands on any yet. But if you are looking for lower sugar jams and jellies and pie fillings and all that, try Pomona's pectin. But we need to give that sugar a good stir and bring it back to a boil. And then once it is back at a hard boil, we need to boil it hard for 1 minute straight and pretty much stir constantly that whole time because it does scorch easily. Once it's hard boiled for 1 minute, you can take it off the heat and start filling your jars. I have already had these jars being heated in my dishwasher. So you do want to be loading this really hot jam into pretty hot jars, or at least really, really warm jars, to avoid temperature change shock to the glass. But we are going to fill up the jars to a 1/4 inch headspace. I tend to go 1/2 inch headspace. All of your recipes say 1/4 inch headspace, which is, totally fine. But I just generally do 1/2 inch headspace for all of my jams and jellies. I find that 1/4 inch headspace just feels way too full, and I feel like I've had more lid failures when I had the food up too high in the jar. but between a 1/4 inch headspace and 1/2 inch headspace is what we're going for. After that, we'll just get our jars ready for the canner by debubbling and then wiping our rims, placing clean lids and rings to fingertip tight. I'll be using my steam canner for this processing day, but you can certainly use a water bath canner. I love my steam canner for jams and jellies, things that process pretty quickly. This recipe only needs to process for 10 minutes, but you start out by filling up the bottom of your steam canner tray until the water level is level with those little holes that you see here, which we have gotten to that point. And then we just bring up our heat to warm and get ready to start putting in our jars. There's no certain way that you have to load your jars. There's not like a certain pattern that you have to keep it. You just want all your jars to fit in there. As long as your lid can have a secure fit over your jars, you're good to go. The reason why I love using my steam canner for things that only take about 10 minutes to process is because the steam canner uses so much less water than a water bath canner, and because of that, it comes up to heat a lot faster. I can usually get 2 loads done in my steam canner for the time that it takes me to get 1 load done in my water bath canner. And that time savings is just so phenomenal and worth it to me. Once the canner is fully loaded, we bring it up to high heat and we're ready to start our processing times whenever the needle gets into the zone that is for your elevation. I have marked where my zone is, but everyone's elevation levels and zone levels are going to be different, so you'll want to check that. But this recipe for my elevation only needed to process for 10 minutes. So after it's done, I turned the heat off and I let it sit there for 5 minutes. I didn't record a clip for that, but I did let it sit there with the heat off for 5 minutes before opening that dome. And here is how it turned out. I'm very happy with the end results. So I mentioned that towards the end of the video, I wanted to show you just a really delicious and quick and easy way that we like to enjoy pie fillings, even though we don't generally eat pies. And that is cinnamon rolls, but not just regular cinnamon rolls, but cinnamon rolls that are more, instead of really heavy on the cinnamon and really heavy on the, like the powdered sugar icing, instead we top it with the fruit pie filling. So this isn't a dedicated video to making these cinnamon rolls, but we do have a dedicated video with that recipe and step-by-step instructions for how to make this recipe. One thing I love about this recipe in particular is that you don't need any ingredients that you might not have on hand. This recipe uses only ingredients that pretty much everyone has in their pantry already, so we don't have to run out to the store and buy heavy cream or buttermilk or powdered sugar. It uses just regular old pantry staples. You saw me pour some what it looked like a milk mixture, and that was our kind of kitchen hack for buttermilk, and that is just a tablespoon of vinegar per cup of milk and letting it sit there at room temperature for about 10 minutes. It very, very slightly sours the milk, not to where it's gross and nasty, but just to where it tastes very, very similar to buttermilk. Once we get our cinnamon sugar layer on there, we just roll it up like you would a typical cinnamon roll or fruit roll, whatever it is that you're making. Get that chopped up into slices and into our hot skillet and into the oven. After it's cooked about halfway through is when we take it out and pour on our fruit pie topping. I just do a pint jar. That's why I can pie fillings in pint jars, whereas usually you would see them done in quart jars. And that's because we don't use it for pie. We use it for things like this. And that pint size is the perfect size for that. Here's what it looks like fresh out of the oven. It's delicious all by itself. A scoop of vanilla ice cream makes it even better. So that was 5 quarts of blueberries, and what did it get us? We ended up with 6 pints of the blueberry pie filling. I still need to wash these up and get these cleaned up because we did have that siphoning, as you saw. And I put the one that siphoned out real bad in the fridge, and we've already used that in our fruit cobbler, like crisp type recipe. We do it in like a make-ahead jar style. I think we have a video on that. Yes, we do have a video on that mix, which is like a make-ahead fruit crisp cobbler type mix. It uses oats, brown sugar, flour, and that kind of thing. And all you have to do when you make it is melt a tablespoon of butter, empty out your make-ahead jar, crumble it all up, and then pour your whatever fruit pie filling, crushed fruit. You can even use jams. You can use frozen fruit. It's just a really fast dessert. So I will link that in the description box below if you're interested in checking that out. It was delicious. We topped it with a scoop of vanilla ice cream, of course. So then we have 11 half pints of blueberry jam. So I was really disappointed this year to not get a great deal on strawberries like I usually do. Strawberry jam is my kids' absolute favorite for PB&Js. They also really like it in their oatmeal. So this year, when I got a good deal on blueberries instead of strawberries, I wanted to get as many half pints of jam out of it as possible, so that they could use that to flavor their oatmeal instead of strawberries this year, in case I still can't find a good deal. But I'm holding out for still finding a good deal. We'll see. Lord willing, we'll find one. But the blueberry jam turned out fantastic. You can see how thick it is. It's not budging at all. That's one reason that I really enjoy the Hoosier Hill pectin. It seems to just really, I've never had any setting issues with the pectin once I started using that, but it just requires so much sugar. So I'm really looking forward to using that Pomona's pectin as soon as possible. Okay, I hope that was helpful to y'all, and we will see you next time. Bye.